Welcome, Hilary. Thank you so much for being with me today and answering some of the questions that we've talked about. And I was hoping that you could start off by introducing yourself and sharing a little bit about your background and what's led you to this area of focus.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for having me. I'm Dr. Hilary Mandzik. I'm a clinical psychologist and a mom of three. And I have a private therapy practice where I specialize in working with parents. So parenting work, perinatal mental health, postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety, and mental health through pregnancy, and trauma. And then separate of that, I have evolved into having a parent coaching business that is separate because I found that I was seeing kids in therapy. In fact, I saw kids pretty much exclusively for almost 15 years. And that was in all kinds of settings, residential treatment, therapeutic schools. And I really loved working with kids. In fact, I never thought I'd be working with adults. And then I became a parent and I was like, whoa, parents need a lot of support. So that kind of evolved as a second specialization. But what I found was that I was getting a lot of highly sensitive, emotionally intense kids in my practice who were struggling at home, doing great at school. And so parents would bring them to therapy thinking that play therapy was the next right step. And I would do what I thought was great work with these kids. They'd come in, they'd do great, just like they did at school. And parents were like, but nothing's changing at home. Like, here's a video of the meltdown they had last night. And so it hit me, this is not the right intervention for these kids. They're here with me for an hour a week and they're at school or with parents the other 167 hours of the week. And so I started inviting parents in to come work with me. And that's when, in as little as a couple of weeks, I'd hear, I've got a different kid. So I've started offering that to parents through coaching, which means I can work with people not just in the states where I'm licensed, but I've actually had clients from Australia and New Zealand, and I'm able to support them over the course of this 8-week program and really watch family dynamics transform as parents learn to meet the needs of their highly sensitive kids. So I'm also raising 3 very deep feelers of my own. So, and I am definitely a highly sensitive person, which I've come to realize through this work. As a kid, I had big emotions. And I think for most of us growing up, as in the 80s and 90s, our parents didn't really know how to help us with our emotions. That wasn't taught as part of how to parent. It was just behavior and rewards and punishments. And so I'm learning a lot about myself in this process too. And that's what a lot of the parents I work with say is that, wow, I'm learning so much about my own emotions in helping tend to my child's emotions. So I feel like I've really found my life's passion. I feel very grateful for that and to get to do this work.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great as a parent to know that there's support out there, not only for your child, but definitely for yourself. As you mentioned, like you're learning how to be a better parent and maybe things that you're looking for. Are you seeing any trends either with neurotypical or neurodivergent kids, or you're really just seeing across the board these same trends with highly sensitive kind of feelings and emotions, both on both sides of neurotypical spectrum or neurodivergent?
That's a great question. And honestly, I see it across the board. These kids who just seem to have these bigger emotions. And sometimes it's really just a parenting mismatch. And it's not about like, this is an unfixable mismatch. It's parenting from a place of what we know, rewards and punishments and whatnot. And then you have this child who feels these really deep emotions and they easily go to a place of shame. And you get into this cycle of disconnection where the more the child feels disconnected and shameful, the more they act out, the more the parent then doubles down on these stricter methods. And so sometimes, it may not even, it is a temperament, but it's also just that mismatch. And creating a bridge between the two is really the answer. But I see this in neurodiverse kids for sure. Kids with ADHD, some kids with autism absolutely are highly sensitive. And I do see some of these kiddos that are more deeply feeling kids. They do also have some sensory sensitivity sometimes too.
Yeah.
My middle child is absolutely a sensory seeker. It has been since he was born, but that's not always present necessarily.
Yeah. I mean, my son, he's 13, he is autistic, and he is definitely more of like my sensitive child. I also have an 11-year-old neurotypical daughter, and she has a little bit of like a tougher exterior about her, but my, autism child, like he is very sensitive and he can be very hard on himself. And so we do go through a lot of like, tell me about what you're feeling, how does this make you feel? What would make you feel better? So we talk a lot about it. But, it's also hard for me as a parent. Like I'm also a work in progress and figuring out like those dynamics, and also as he is older and he is kind of reaching those teenage years, like how do hormones play into that? So it's
Yeah.
very layered for sure.
Oh, it absolutely is. And I think us learning how to sort of evolve with our kids too as they grow and their needs change is really tough sometimes to know how to
Yeah.
respond, how to grow with them.
Yeah. Well, I know we chatted a little bit on Instagram about Disneyland, and my area of focus is really to talk about, Disney and Disneyland being, really a place for everyone. And as we talked about, like highly sensitive children or even adults, and, I'd like to move on to the Disneyland topic. And I'd like to really talk about, and I know you just went with your family, but maybe in going, what are some strategies or items that parents can proactively prepare themselves for and their children for in making a big trip like this?
Absolutely. It's such a great question. And yes, we did just do a week-long Disney trip with, it was the first one we've done with our kids. And for my husband and I, it's the first one we've done since we were kids. And oh my gosh, so many things. I think the first thing I will say, and I will say this to any parent taking any trip with their child, have the right mindset going into it. Like I knew that this trip was going to be a trip. It was going to be fun, but it was not going to be a vacation. It was going to be parenting in a different location. And I think that's really important that we go in with that mindset, because if we don't, we're going to feel like, why am I not getting to relax? Why am I not getting to do this? Right? Why am I having to help my child with all these meltdowns? Because we had plenty of moments during our trip where my kids were struggling. And we were able to work through them. And so that's part of what I'll share, is how we kind of worked through that and how we preempted that as much as possible. But I would say, preparing your child for what is going to come is massive. Okay. For all kids, especially for highly sensitive kids, it's really important to help them understand what to expect. So if your child struggles with crowds, letting them know it's going to be really crowded. And even if your child doesn't struggle with crowds, we prepared our kids for, you're going to need to stay really close to us. And there might be times, like for my daughter, she just turned 3 and she was 2 when we were at Disney. And there were times I told her, I was like, yes, you can walk next to us. That's fine. And other times you've got to be in the stroller because there's like a gazillion people around and I don't want
Yeah.
something to happen. And so just preparing her for that helped a little bit with that, like, oh, I have to go back in the stroller, potential meltdown. Um, Letting them know that it's okay to need a break, and having, practicing giving them the language. Some kids do really well with a signal versus words. So you can teach them to give you a signal when they need a break, and then together you can find a break space together. And I think that's really important too, is that if you've got a kid who cannot go, 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 schedule in some downtime. Disney is great for that. There are lots of little shaded, out of the way places where you can go and have a snack and just kind of decompress a little bit. There's also
Yeah.
um, attractions that prioritize that, right? Like I'm thinking at Disney World, or I guess this is the Epcot, Turtle Talk is one where you can just go and sit in the air conditioning and just watch a show, essentially. So things like that, and making sure that you're not doing all the go, go, go things, I think is really important. Rides is a whole other category. I've got one who literally rode Tower of Terror with me at age 6 and was like, let's do it again. And then my 9-year-old is a lot more like, hang on, let me make sure. Um, and so just honoring that, and also being able to help your child talk through, okay, do you really not want to go on this? Or maybe are you feeling scared, but you do want to try it, and helping them manage those feelings. Because some kids, like I know if my 9-year-old had ridden Tower of Terror, he would be like traumatized. He would hate that. But I also know there were other rides that if he hadn't ridden, he would regret. So helping him with that and really knowing your kid, and just helping them talk through, how do I want to feel when I'm done with this? Do I think I'll feel so scared that it was not worth it? Do I think I'll feel like I missed out?
Yeah.
So those are just a couple things off the top of my head. Oh, and food, that's another thing. Making sure they had some protein at each meal was a game changer for us. Just, I mean, not that we didn't have the sugary snacks, but making sure it wasn't all sugary snacks.
Yeah. No, that's great. And I love, like, we are big fans of trying to do things that are not always rides. So we go through Sleeping Beauty's castle, we go to the new tree house, we take breaks on Tom Sawyer's Island. I know it's a little bit different from Walt Disney World to Disneyland, but there are always areas in the parks to be able to do things other than rides, just to kind of have a sensory break.
Yes, totally. Because Disney is sensory overload for pretty much everybody. I feel like it is
Yeah.
so many people. It's loud. There's music everywhere. There's like rides and lights and all the things. There's tons of toys and food and something to buy at every turn too. And I think that can be a lot for kids. The fireworks, highly recommend. One of my favorite parts of the experience, but I wish we had bought noise protection for my daughter because she's just very sensitive to sounds and she's little. She just turned 3. She was 2 when we were there, so she was still a toddler. And I wish we had thought to do that because I thought we'll be out in the open, so it won't be that bad. But it is pretty loud, and I don't even know that she could fully enjoy it because she was kind of white knuckling. But so that in retrospect, I would have done that. My boys were fine, but if you have a kid is gonna be overwhelmed by the noise, bring noise protection, and even just to wear through the park if you have a kid that is really sensitive.
Yeah. Yeah. I see a lot of kids throughout Disneyland, and even for my son, like when he was younger, he definitely had some, sensitivities to loud sounds, and it seems like he has gotten better with that, but it is still overwhelming. And not just the sounds, the crowds and the, groups of people, especially Disneyland, it's a little bit more kind of compact. So you're really kind of crowded into people.
Yeah.
So it's also good to think about other areas throughout the parks that you can watch fireworks potentially from a distance that could help with the sound and then also give you a little bit more space. So,
Yeah, that is such a great point because I think if you're just trying to get like up to the front, you could be stuck in a really tight crowd of people for
yeah.
sure.
So, talking a little bit about like picking up on cues or triggers that parents may overlook in, kind of walking through crowds at Disneyland or Disney World or, maybe being nervous about rides. Like, how do you talk through that with parents and for them to maybe be more aware of triggers or cues that they may be overlooking?
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. So, first of all, with my kids, I notice if they start to get more almost whiny, complainy, like, oh, I'm tired, I don't want to walk. We need to proactively start looking for a break or for food or whatever they might need. When I see my boys fighting more, picking at each other a little bit more, that's always a sign that, like, okay, we're having some feelings. Um, if you notice that your child seems to be overreacting, that's a term that I'll tell parents, just completely eliminate that from your vocabulary, especially if you're raising a sensitive child, because their feelings are that big to them. They're not overreacting, and we don't get to judge how big this feeling feels. But if we're noticing that they're having maybe a disproportionate response to what we would expect,
Mhm.
that's a great sign that we probably need to tune in. And, one thing I'll say to my kids is, hey, I'm noticing that we're really wiggly, or I'm noticing that you two are fighting a lot. I'll just point out what I'm noticing. And I'll say, and I know that that's not how you typically act. So I'm wondering what's going on. And what that does, for my kids, they're not always going to immediately say, oh, it's this. Sometimes they will. But what it does is it says, I see the good kid, I see you, I see your goodness through this challenging moment. So how can I help you? Right. And even if they don't know, it opens up that dialogue where they feel emotionally safe. Because for a lot of sensitive kids, they feel very attacked when we say, hey, stop doing this, or don't do that, or we don't hit, or whatever. So
Yeah.
just seeing them in that moment.
Yeah. So when parents are kind of sensing or a child is really starting to kind of lean into they're shutting down, they're having a meltdown, what are some of the strategies that you help parents kind of navigate or tools like to either let your child work through that meltdown or how to kind of recover? And I think specifically when you're at like a theme park, there's a lot of people around, people, there could be some staring, which we're always working through, but like what are some of the tools that you give parents ahead of time to kind of work through those?
Yeah, that is a really important thing to come armed with, is just some tools, and I would argue too, probably the best tool we have is our perspective. So go in expecting that there are going to be some meltdowns. Just know it's going to happen. and know that it's normal. And know that when our kids melt down, even if it's a sensory meltdown, it's just they've had way too much stimulation without a sensory break. If it is an emotional meltdown, their, as I call it, the emotional water pitcher is full and they need to pour some water out. It's a healthy process, it's normal, and it's expected.
Mhm.
And if our whole energy, once it starts to happen, is focused on trying to shut it down, we are going to have that backfire every single time. So if we go in with the perspective that it's normal and that it doesn't mean that we're a bad parent or that we have a bad kid, and that it doesn't matter what other people might think, if you can just zero in on what your child needs in that moment, you're going to be so much more effective. And I always tell the story. I remember my first time that I dealt with a public meltdown. I got so upset with my child and I went back to the car and I was like, why did you do that? Versus once I understood how to show up for him, I was that woman hugging him in the shopping cart going, I know you can't buy the truck and you're so sad. And I didn't care who was looking at me because I knew what he needed. And so if we can really be grounded in that, we're going to be so much more effective. Now, in a public place, I always tell parents, if you can find a spot that's more private, do that. You know, that's just out of courtesy to your child and yourself and to give yourself that space. And so I'm thinking about, we were at Hollywood Studios and they have the whole Star Wars area. And
Yeah.
my 6-year-old was really struggling. He didn't like something his brother did. He was really having a hard time. He was just like crying. And I know that when he wasn't at a 10 out of 10, that would really bother him for people to see that. So I ushered him over to this little shady corner and we just sat there together and I just hugged him and I was like, you know, I'm here. And I think that's the really important piece to remember is that during a meltdown, we don't have to fix it. We don't have to stop it. You're not a bad parent if you can't get your kid back to calm because that's actually not your job. It's your job to keep them safe and allow them to release their emotions.
Mhm.
That's it. It's all you have to do. And so if you can remember that, you're going to be okay. And you know, once you have them once they have let that out of their bodies and they are more calm, and then you can start to think with them about like, would a snack be helpful? Are you ready to go try this? Right. But we can't do any of that until they're at a place where their nervous system's a little more regulated.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the meltdowns are with my son a little bit more few and far between, but I mean, we were just there at 4th of July last year and he just was so tired. I think that we had tried to push through the day a little too long and we tried to get on another couple of rides. And I think that was an area or an opportunity for me as a parent. Like I missed that social cue. You know, I missed and we had a little bit of like an emotional breakdown on the way back to the hotel. And yeah, people were looking and I just let him work through it and we got back to the room and there was some recovery in that. But I think it is hard as a parent to just kind of be in that zone. Especially for me, because my son is older and, you know, I'm wondering like, what about for parents that you're working with for older kids? Like, are there different tools or kind of strategies that you give them?
Yeah, it's so important. So important. So for our older kids, I think the biggest thing that we can do is just let them know that we're here and not try to fix it for them. I think with older kids, we tend to really give them solutions a lot of the time when they're struggling. And just to let them know it's okay. It's okay. You're having a hard time. Like we all have those moments. I mean, how many times have we had like adult meltdowns? I'll tell you, the night we got to Disney, I was up till 4 a.m. studying those lightning lanes because again, I hadn't been since I was a kid. And the next morning I was tired and I forget what happened, but some stupid little thing happened and I had my own little like moment of tears. And so like even as adults, this happens. But our older kids still developing brains. And again, this is where that perspective is so important because our brains do not fully develop until we're like 28 years old. So you got a 13-year-old, they might be living in a bigger body, but they are still a developing person and their brain is still developing. So just recognizing that if you're 13-year-old, or like I know there were moments with my 9-year-old where I'm like, seriously, but he was having a real emotional moment and that's okay. So just having that perspective again is so important. And then just having that energy of I'm here, I got you, whatever you need, right? And then knowing too that like sometimes you do need to just call it and go back to the hotel.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's the best thing you can do. And I tell parents that all the time with public meltdowns. It's not punitive, like look what you made us do, but it's the most loving thing you can do. Like, hey, let's just go take a break. And I know we did that one day. the night we went back for the fireworks. And I'm so glad that we did. I'm so glad we took that like 2 hour break. We ordered room service instead of going out to dinner. We had canceled, we had reservations for like a really cool storybook dinner for with the Snow White at Artist Point. And I'm still sad we missed it, but man, it was the right decision. It was what we needed to do. Had we pushed our kids through that dinner and then gone to fireworks, it would have been awful. And as it was, we went back, we had some room service, we had a good time, and then we were able to actually enjoy that evening.
Yeah, I've been talking a lot about that with parents that have DM'd me asking for tips. And I think the best advice that I can give anyone is set the expectation, have a plan, but be prepared to pivot. Things
Yeah.
are going to happen. Life happens. You're with children, even sometimes with adults. Like you have to be prepared to pivot and be okay with it. So, yeah.
Absolutely. That comes with that mindset, right? Be prepared to pivot. Be prepared that your kid might not want to ride the ride that you waited in line for, and they might freak out. And, that's okay that they don't want to ride that ride. And you had asked earlier about talking through that and helping your child figure out too, like if it is something that they want to do. And that's something that I've really had to work with my oldest child on, because there's times I know he'd regret it if he didn't follow through. So really just talking with him about like, how do you think you'll feel when you're done, and thinking through both scenarios and helping them hold two feelings at once. I'm scared and I'm also really excited and I want to try this, and it's okay to feel both at the same time.
Yeah. I also talk to other parents about, especially if it's their first trip to Disneyland or Disney World, there are so many YouTube videos that they can watch ahead of time to prepare their children. And I think that that just goes with that, like, kind of that preparation that goes into like, we're going to a new place. This is what it's going to look like. There's going to be these people, and here are some rides that you may be interested in. So what are any overall recommendations that you can give parents on preparing their child for Disney World or Disneyland?
Yeah, I really love what you said about watching the videos. We actually did that. So this was a Christmas present for my kids. It was part of their Christmas present. And how we revealed it was we showed them a video of Disney. And then like, I still get emotional thinking about their reaction. They were just like, oh my gosh, like we're going. And so then we did spend the morning kind of, like my son had heard of the Slinky Dog ride. And he's like, oh, I want to see that. I want to go on that. So we watched the video, and we watched a video of where we were going to be staying and like the pool that we could swim at. And they were just like, this is so cool. But just knowing what to expect and knowing what it was going to feel like was really great. And then, just preparing them for, it's going to be, we didn't fly, right? We're in North Carolina. We didn't fly. It was I think 8 hours, but really on 95, it was a lot more than that. And so, it was going to be a long drive. And one thing that we did as parents, we went ahead and spent the extra money on hotels for each way, stopping halfway, because I think at first my husband and I thought we could drive straight. And like, if you've got a long drive with kids, give yourself that grace of not trying to jam it all in. If you have the means, like stay halfway if you have a long drive like that. If you are flying, maybe don't go straight from plane to theme park, right? Give yourself and give your trip room to breathe. And then towards that end, if you're spending the money to go to Disney, my advice would be, if you have the ability and the resources, things like, the Genie Plus, and learning how to use that. And like I told you, I stayed up and bought, I think, this like $49 online course, learning how to use it, crash course, way to wait till the last minute. But if you have the time ahead of time to like read up on how to use those things, it really can make a difference with kids to not have to stand in a line for like an hour and a half. And I don't think we waited more than 15 minutes to get on anything. So, yes, it's a little more money, but if you're already spending the money to go, especially if it's like a big trip, right? If it's a day trip and you're close enough to go multiple times, don't stress about fitting everything in. And I would say don't stress about fitting it all in anyway. But, have your plan, and then have your plan B and your plan C, and be okay with and flexible with if it changes. But if you do want to make this big trip, like I know we're probably not going to go again for a couple of years. And so having those lightning lanes in Genie Plus was really, really helpful, just because it is a very real impact on kids to have to stand and wait in line. That's, it's not like just a luxury. It actually helps kids tolerate being at the park. So for me, that was really, really helpful. What else? Again, the downtime, like time at the resort or the hotel or wherever you're staying, to just sort of be in the room. My kids enjoyed watching some cartoons, you know, like that was really fun for them, or swimming in the pool. And just making sure that you're not forcing them to go, 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 and having that expectation that maybe if you can, you book an extra day so that you can breathe a little bit more versus trying to pack everything into one day. But my overall advice would be to do it if it's at all possible for you. Yes, it's a lot. I think I got 25,000 steps the day we were at Epcot. Like it's a big, you're gonna get exercise, you're gonna be tired. But my entire family looks back on that trip with such fond memories. So do it, you know, like do it. Don't let your child's sensitivities or the fear of meltdown stop you. It's so worth it. And you can absolutely accommodate your child's needs on this trip.